You just said sorry to a chair you bumped into. Not as a joke. Your mouth formed the word before your brain even registered what happened. An offering made to furniture, to empty air, to no one. And right now, there's a weight sitting low behind your sternum. Not sharp, not dramatic. More like a stone you swallowed years ago that never dissolved. It presses harder every time you walk into a room and wonder if you're taking up too much of it. Every time you speak without being spoken to first. Every time your existence requires someone, anyone, to adjust even slightly. You've been calling this politeness, good manners, consideration for others. But what if that reflexive sorry isn't courtesy at all? What if it's a confession? A quiet, constant admission that somewhere in the deepest architecture of who you are, you believe your presence is a burden the world never agreed to carry? Stay here. Because that stone in your chest, it was placed there by someone else's hands, and you've been carrying it so long you forgot it isn't yours. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Not in theory, in your body. You apologize when someone bumps into you. You say sorry before asking a question at work, as if curiosity were an imposition. You walk into a coffee shop, and if the barista looks even slightly tired, something in your chest contracts and whispers, "I'm bothering them. I shouldn't have come." You've rewritten a text message 11 times. Not to get the words right, but to make yourself smaller inside of them. Shorter, less needy, less there. You finally send something breezy, something that costs you nothing and reveals nothing. And then you put the phone face down on the table because even that felt like too much. Here's what no one talks about. You don't just feel guilty for what you do. You feel guilty for what you are, for the space your body occupies, for the air your lungs pull in, for the audacity of having needs in a world that taught you, early and relentlessly, that your needs were the problem. This isn't anxiety. Not the way people casually use that word. Anxiety says, something bad might happen. This says, something bad already is happening, and it's me. That distinction matters, because you've been trying to fix a thinking problem when what you're actually living inside is an identity wound. A crack that runs all the way down to the foundation. Not in your logic, in your blueprint. And the reason no one catches it, the reason you haven't caught it, is because it looks so much like virtue. People praise you for it. You're so considerate. You're so easy to be around. You never cause problems. They don't realize they're complimenting a fortress. They don't realize that every sorry is a load-bearing wall you installed to keep the building from collapsing. And you smile. Because what are you going to say? Thank you, I built this prison myself? Let me tell you why your body does this before your mind even gets a vote. There's something neuroscientist Dr. Stephen Porges identified called neuroception. And understanding it might change how you see every apology you've ever made. Neuroception is your nervous system's below-conscious scanning system. It reads rooms before you read faces. It detects threat before your thinking brain has time to form a thought. It doesn't ask, am I safe? It decides you're not, and then sends the memo to your muscles, your breath, your voice. For most people, this system runs quietly in the background. A gentle hum of assessment. Safe, safe, safe. Mildly uncertain. Safe. For you, the dial is set to a different frequency entirely. Not because it's broken, but because someone calibrated it a long time ago, in a room where the air pressure changed without warning, where a door closing too hard meant something, where a particular silence was louder than any scream, where the difference between a good night and a devastating one was written in micro-expressions you had to learn to read before you could read words. Your nervous system learned, in that room, that the safest thing you could do was become architecturally invisible. Pull the walls in, lower the ceiling, Make the whole structure of you so unobtrusive that no one would ever need to notice it, react to it, or be burdened by its presence. And the apology, that reflexive, automatic sorry, that's not politeness. That's a pressure valve. Your nervous system releases it the way a building releases steam. Not because anything is wrong in this moment, but because the internal pressure never fully drops. You're always braced, always 1 degree away from the belief that your next breath might be the one that inconveniences someone past their limit. Think about what that means. You're not choosing to apologize. You're not even deciding to feel guilty. Your body is running a program that was written before you had language, and before you had logic, before you had any say in the blueprints. And here's where it gets quietly devastating. You apologize to prevent a conflict that already happened, years ago, in a room you no longer occupy, with someone whose voice still echoes in the walls of your nervous system. But your body doesn't know that chapter ended. It's still scanning for that particular shift in atmospheric pressure, that tightness in someone's jaw, that fraction of a second pause before they respond. And it's still sending the same urgent signal. Shrink. Now, before it's too late. You're not living in the present. You're performing damage control for a past that your body refuses to file away as finished. You know what this actually looks like from the outside? Let me show you. You're sitting at dinner with friends. Someone tells a joke. Everyone laughs, including you. But somewhere between the laugh and the next breath, a thought slides in sideways. Was I too loud? Did I take up too much of the moment? Did my laugh change the temperature of the table? You glance around. Microscan, face, face, face. Everyone looks fine. No one flinched, no one noticed. But the scan itself, that invisible sweep of every face for signs of irritation, discomfort, burden, took effort, took energy, took a part of you that could have been present and routed it into surveillance instead. And by the time dessert comes, you're exhausted. Not from the conversation, from the guard shift you've been running in silence. No one at that table knows you just worked harder than anyone else in the room. Not to be funny, not to be interesting, not to be liked, but to ensure that your existence didn't cost them anything. That's not social anxiety in the way people casually throw that term around. That's a nervous system doing exactly what it was trained to do. Treat every room like a room where your presence must be earned, justified, and endlessly apologized for. And here is the part that might sting in a way you don't expect. That constant scanning, that exhausting vigilance, that ability to read a room at the speed of breath, to feel the emotional weather shift before anyone else notices the clouds. It made you extraordinary, not in the way anyone intended, not in a way that feels like a gift, but extraordinary nonetheless. You walk into a room and within seconds you know who's pretending to be fine. You can hear the difference between a real laugh and a rehearsed one. You sense the tension between two people before they've acknowledged it themselves. You carry a map of every person's emotional weather system, updated in real time, running on neural hardware most people don't even possess. The research on this is striking. The landmark AC study, led by Dr. Vincent Felitti and Dr. Robert Anda, examined what happens to people who grow up in unpredictable emotional environments. And what they found wasn't just a catalog of damage. Buried in the data was something the headlines rarely mention. People who scored high on adverse childhood experiences didn't just carry wounds. They carried capacities, heightened empathy, acute emotional intelligence, and a near-surgical ability to detect what someone needs before they found the words to ask. You're too sensitive isn't a flaw in the architecture. It's a reinforced wall, built to withstand pressure most people never have to bear. But, and this is the part that sits in your throat like a word you can't quite say, you never got to use that gift for yourself. Every ounce of that emotional intelligence was pointed outward. Toward the person whose mood dictated whether the house felt safe. Toward the friend who needed you at 2 a.m. and never once asked who you called at 2 a.m. Toward the partner who never noticed you were drowning because you were so skilled at treading water with a smile. You became the architect of everyone else's comfort. And in doing so, you left your own building unfinished. No insulation, no windows. Just exposed beams and a door that's always open because you never believed you had the right to close it. Hey, I need you to hear this next part without bracing, without scanning my tone for danger. Just hear it. The guilt you carry, that chronic low-grade hum that says, I'm too much and I'm not enough simultaneously. That impossible contradiction that you somehow live inside every single day. It isn't a character flaw. It's an architectural compromise. Somewhere in your early construction, you were handed a choice no child should ever have to make. Take up space and risk losing the connection. Or collapse inward and keep the love. You chose love. Every time. Of course you did. And the guilt became the mortar. The binding agent that held the whole structure together. Without it, you were terrified the building would fall. So you kept mixing it, kept applying it, kept using sorry as spackle for cracks you didn't even make. You built your guilt into the foundation and then wondered why the whole structure trembles every time you try to stand at full height. But mortar made of guilt doesn't hold forever. It corrodes. Slowly. From the inside. You know what I mean. You feel it in the particular way that only people who carry this feel it. The exhaustion that sleep doesn't repair. The way you can be surrounded by people who genuinely love you and still feel like you're standing behind glass. Visible, proximate, fundamentally untouchable. The strange, suffocating grief for a life you can't quite picture. Not a life where hard things didn't happen. Yes, but a life where you were allowed to exist at full dimension. You grieve the child who raised her hand in class and then lowered it before the teacher looked. The teenager who wrote things in journals and buried them beneath the mattress. Not because the words were shameful, but because wanting to be heard felt shameful. The adult who has opinions, strong ones, brilliant ones, ones that could shift the entire room, but delivers them wrapped in so many qualifiers and apologies that by the time they land, all the edges have been sanded down to nothing. This might be a dumb question, but sorry, I just think maybe I could be wrong. But you hear these come out of your mouth, and somewhere behind your ribs, the original architect flinches. Because it knows, you know. Those aren't hedges, they're evacuations. And you vacate your own authority before anyone can challenge it. You leave the building before anyone can ask you to leave. And the cost isn't just internal. It reshapes every relationship you touch. When you apologize for existing, you train the people around you to accept your smallness as the default. Not out of cruelty, out of convenience. You've made it so effortless to overlook you that overlooking you starts to feel like the natural order. Your absence of needs becomes the baseline. And the one time you express one, the one time you say, actually, that hurt, it registers as seismic, dramatic, too much. You attract people who take and take, not because they're predators, but because you built a doorway with no door. You designed the architecture of the relationship so that access to you is free, unlimited, unconditional. While access to them requires an appointment you're too afraid to request. And when someone who actually sees you asks, "What do you need?" your throat closes. Not because you don't know the answer, because the question itself feels structurally dangerous. Like pulling a support beam and waiting to see if the ceiling holds. I'm fine. I don't need anything. Sorry. I don't want to be difficult. The weight of perpetual atonement isn't just heavy, it's hollow. Because you're atoning for a crime you never committed. The crime of being born with needs. the crime of existing in full dimension, the crime of turning to the people you loved and asking them, quietly, carefully, with every qualifier you could muster, to make room for you. That was never a crime. It was never even close. So what do you do with a building whose foundation was poured in guilt? You don't demolish it. That building kept you alive. Those load-bearing walls of apology and self-erasure, they held. When nothing else in your world was structurally sound, when the floor kept shifting beneath you, those walls held. You don't tear down what saved you. You honor it by outgrowing it. You renovate. Carefully, wall by wall, with your own hands this time, following blueprints that you drew. And here's what the renovation looks like in practice. It's quieter than you'd think, less dramatic than Instagram would have you believe. It starts with the pause, not a cinematic one, not a deep breath on a mountaintop, just a half breath, a tremor of space between the impulse and the word. The next time sorry rises in your throat. And it will, and probably within the hour. You pause, not to judge yourself for the impulse, just to ask gently, like an architect surveying the structure. Did I actually cross a boundary here? Or am I performing a ritual of atonement for the crime of having mass and volume? Most of the time, the answer will be clear. No boundary was crossed. You just existed near someone, and that's not a transgression. That's called being alive. Dr. Kristen Neff's research on self-compassion reveals something that might reorganize your entire inner architecture. And it explains why this renovation feels so terrifying at first. People who grew up believing their needs were burdensome don't just lack self-compassion. They experience self-compassion as structurally dangerous. Your nervous system interprets kindness toward yourself as a dropped guard. It's on a removed, load-bearing wall. Being soft toward yourself feels like pulling out a brick and waiting for the collapse. But Neff's work, and the growing body of neuroscience surrounding it, shows something the guilt doesn't want you to know. Self-compassion doesn't weaken the structure. It replaces the corroded mortar with something that actually holds. Neural pathways that once defaulted to self-punishment begin, slowly, imperfectly, with more setbacks than breakthroughs, to root toward self-witness instead. Not self-indulgence, not letting yourself off the hook. Just the radical, terrifying, quiet act of treating yourself with the same architectural care you've been giving everyone else for your entire life. This isn't a light switch, it's a renovation. And renovations are slow. They're messy. They're loud when you expected them to be graceful. Some days you pull back a wall and find damage you didn't know was there. Water stains, stress fractures, whole sections that were never properly supported. That's not a setback. That's the work working. Here's what I want you to try. Not tomorrow. Not when you feel ready. You will never feel ready. That's the guilt talking, telling you that even healing is something you need permission for. The next time you catch yourself apologizing for something that requires no apology, for asking a question, for having a feeling, for being in the path of someone who wasn't watching where they were going, replace the sorry with something else. Not a correction, a reclamation. Instead of sorry, can I ask something? Try. I have a question. Instead of sorry for venting, try, thank you for listening. Instead of, sorry, I'm like this, say nothing. Let the silence stand. Feel the discomfort of not shrinking. Feel your nervous system spike like an alarm. And then, if you wait, if you breathe, if you let the building tremble without rushing to reinforce it, feel it settle into the strange, unfamiliar hum of uncollapsed space. You won't do this perfectly. You'll apologize for apologizing. You'll catch yourself mid-sorry and feel the guilt double back on itself like a staircase that leads to its own beginning. That's okay. That's not failure. The catch is the renovation. Every time you notice the reflex, every time you feel the word forming and choose, even once, to let it dissolve, you're sketching a new line on the blueprint. Picture this, a year from now, maybe 2, you're sitting in a meeting. Someone asks your opinion, and instead of the usual architectural scaffolding, this might be a stupid thought, but, or, sorry, you speak. Just speak. The words come out with their edges intact, unpadded, unapologized for, taking up exactly the amount of space they were designed to take. And the room doesn't collapse. No one flinches. The atmospheric pressure doesn't shift. The thing your nervous system has been bracing for since you were small enough to believe that your voice could crack a foundation. It doesn't happen. And in that moment, something in your chest, something that's been clenched so long the muscle forgot it had another setting, loosens. Not all the way. Not with fanfare, but enough. Enough to feel the difference between a building held together by guilt and a building held together by choice. Remember that stone behind your sternum? The one you've been carrying so long it started to feel like an organ? It isn't yours. It was never yours. It was placed there by a moment, a voice, a room where your existence was treated as a problem to be managed rather than a life to be welcomed. And you, because you were small, because you were extraordinary, because survival required architectural genius, you swallowed it. Built your entire structure around it. Made sorry your foundation, and wondered why the whole building shook every time you tried to stand at full height. But foundations can be replaced. I need you to know that. Not overnight. Not without dust and noise and the terrifying sound of old walls coming down. But they can be replaced. And the fact that you're still here, that you've listened this far, that something in your chest recognizes every word like a room it used to live in, tells me something about your blueprints, the original ones. The ones underneath the guilt, underneath the apologies, underneath the years of building smaller rooms so everyone else could breathe more easily. Those blueprints show a building that was always designed to take up space. So here's what I need you to do before you scroll away. Before the world rushes back in and starts handing you new bricks of guilt to carry. Put your hand on your chest, just there. Feel the weight beneath your palm. The old stone, the old architecture, the old apology that lives in your bones. And say, not out loud if that's too much, just inside, just between you and the structure of who you are. I'm not sorry for being here. That's it. That's the first brick of the renovation. If those words landed somewhere real, somewhere beneath the guilt, somewhere the original blueprints are still waiting, drop 2 words in the comments. Not sorry. Not for me. For the version of you that's been apologizing since before you had the language to understand why. And if someone came to mind while you listened, someone who says sorry like punctuation, someone whose extraordinary thoughtfulness is actually a fortress built from exhaustion and love and fear, send this to them. Not to fix them. You can't renovate someone else's building. Just to say, I see how hard you've been holding this up, and you don't have to hold it alone. You were never the burden. You were the builder, and it's time to build for yourself.